Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is Sprinklebeard, and this is Little Sprinkles. Today, we are going to be reviewing the highest cost champion in the game. So, potentially the worst cost champion in the game, or the worst class champion in the game, I guess. The man, the myth, the machine, Titus. So, if you guys like content of reviewed champions, and especially not the best of the best champions being reviewed, just the epics, this is Evaluate the Epic, and I'm your host, Sprinklebeard. We stream over at twitch.tv, typically kind of like Sunday through Wednesday, and then depending on my work schedule, I sometimes can add streams, or most often I tend to subtract streams. Come join us over there. Let's get right into it. So, Titus's role in the game, he is a defender. Now, our defender class in the game is kind of this, like, overly specific role, right? A lot of our defenders, we're not really counting on them for damage. We are not counting on them necessarily for their utility. We are counting on them for their ability to block units and their longevity. So, Titus is this, giant metal machine with some big old shields. So how do his stats compare to his brother epics that are also defenders, or I guess sister epics as well? All of his sibling epics, yes. HP wise, he does have some of the better HP value in terms of the tanks. However, his defense and his magic resistance tend to actually be lower. Now, a lot of people are going to be confused about this because of his cost being 31. Why is he a defender with such an enormous cost to him if his defense and magic resistance stats are lower compared to his brothers when we are talking about, or his siblings, at 6-star and fully promoted? And the biggest reason is this enormous attack stat. By enormous, majority of other defenders only have around 2,000. So we're going to call this 4,300 to make things very simple. If we look at champions like Baron, 2,500, right? So he's got around a 2,000 increase on the Baron. Olog, who is typically everybody's favorite tank in the game and very easy to access, 2,400. Yes, we don't really depend on our defenders for their damage output, but something I want to put out there is that if we look at somebody like Regulus, and his attack stat is not anywhere close to Titus. It is 2,800. It is much lower. The two champions that actually compete and barely succeed over Titus's 4,300, we have Captain Reeve, who I believe is no longer available. Chat, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I believe he was a one-time event champion, but he's got a 4426, so I believe he is the second highest amongst defenders. But this is a champion that very, very few people are going to have access to. And then finally is the legendary Toreador at 4,500. And everybody does know Toreador for his obscene damage as a tank. There's a lot of people who say it's hilarious that he deals so much damage, but he's also supposed to be a tank. Other than that, even amongst the legendaries, like Gon and this gigantic freaking axe that for some reason scales off of his defense stat, not off of his offense stat, and that also does explain why he has 4,000 defense, some of the most ridiculously high defense in the game. It is still, though, in terms of scaling, it is technically less than Titus's attack stat, right? So Titus has this very respectable attack stat and very good defensive stats. Very good being they're much higher than your fighters in comparison. So Titus is going to offer a lot there. His attack interval is slow, and again, we don't really care about most defenders' attacks. We're going to show two different versions of Titus in this video. One of the biggest things to note about Titus before we even talk about the rest of his kit, we are going to talk about his talent. His talent's a lot to read, so we're going to read through all of it, and then we will address it after. He's unable to be healed by allies. For every 6 instances of damage taken, temporarily triggers the thermal barrier, increasing damage reduction by 30% for 5 seconds. Restores HP equal to 5% max HP when the thermal barrier ends or refreshes. So again, anytime that he takes damage, he has a way to heal himself, potentially, but he has to be consistently taking damage as a tank. And again, with his HP pool being massive, that is something that is very easy for him to do. Although his defensive stat could be better, he's still going to scale very well from defense percentage. So this is a perfect example of a tank in this game that more heavily is going to scale off of his total HP, because not only does that allow him to tank more, but it allows him to heal back more on his own. With this also being said, we're going to review his kit now, and then we'll readdress his talents. So, basic attack, he just attacks one enemy, and for some reason that has scaling on it. It's weird, whatever. His passive is Repair Mode. When receiving fatal damage for the first time, this hero triggers a self-repair for 5 seconds, and then revives with 100% HP restored. Additionally, his attack and defense is increased permanently by 15%. This effect can be triggered only one time per deployment. And then as we level him up, you're going to scale up from 15% to 20, 25, 30, 35% increased attack and defensive stats. So again, I would still argue that HP is more effective since he's going to gain bonus defense on top of it. You could argue the opposite, though, that the more defense he has is great, because if he dies, then his defense is going up even higher and being more ridiculous. His ultimate is definitely the crux of his kit. Everything else is just an addition to his ultimate. Enters the Annihilation mode, increasing attack range and restoring 5% HP per second. He can attack up to 3 targets while in Annihilation mode, dealing 220% damage, scaling up to 260% damage for 25 seconds. Also, his HP regenerating 5% over, 5% every second for 25 seconds. That gives him a healing effect of 125% of his massive HP pool. Then, as you scale him up, that can go up from 5% to 6%, which totals him out at 150% of his HP. So as he's taking damage from a boss or from mobs, he can actually out-heal them pretty easily. So, now that we have heard everything, right? He can't be healed by allies. However, he can heal himself up in one of 2 different ways. Let's talk about why this is very interesting. Because he has such high HP, high attack, and respectable defense in terms of the defenders, yes, he's technically the worst at a cost of 31. Majority of us players will argue that 31 cost is just too hard to come by. Now, the workaround to this is that there are some fighters in the game. One of the easiest fighters, as I scroll the wrong direction from fighters, is Narvi. Narvi is a rare that everybody will have access to. Her cost is 10. If you give her a bunch of skill dust, which is very easily accessible, and then blue skill crystals, you can get her to a point where she's regenerating, let's see, that's 3 cost every 15 seconds, right? So that would be an additional 12 per minute when we get that down, fully upgraded. So that's 12 plus an additional 8 cost here. So that's a 20 cost per minute when you have her fully skilled up, right? So understand, to get Titus out isn't super, ridiculously hard. The other person we have is Dalen, and she's definitely considered the best cost regenerator in the game. So hers activates every 30 seconds, and originally is a 13 cost, scaling up to 15 cost, and then it shrinks down from 30 seconds down to 25 seconds. So every 50 seconds, she's generating 26 cost. So Dalen, or Dalen, whatever we want to call her, is the best cost regenerator in the game. So if you were somebody who loves Titus, definitely consider Narvi and Dallin to be the most effective way to get Titus out and to keep up with the tempo. Because admittedly, even though he has this enormous cost, and he has stats that suggest he has high respectable damage, the truth of the matter is you can't really build him for both, right? If we want to do high damage, we want attack percentage, crit rate, crit damage, so on and so forth. And if we want high tanking ability, we want HP percentage, defense percentage, and then potentially like rage regen, which I would argue on him is incredibly clutch, because the faster he's getting to that ultimate, the faster he's being immortal. With that being said, I am going to try, and not necessarily 6-starring him right away, but the next time that there is a Tale of the Smith, I'm going to be trying to give him all the base stats, HP percentage, defense percentage, and attack percentage, and I'm going to see how he operates at that point. We are currently testing him out at 5-star, fully promoted at 5-star, wearing tank gear, and then we're going to show him again real quick in offensive gear. And the quick version of events is his damage is very respectable. I was very shocked at how much damage he was outputting, but we're going to wait until we get to that point. Let's go through his awakenings. When HP is higher than 50%, gains a 20% extra damage reduction. 20% extra damage reduction, I'm assuming this is only physical damage reduction. Pardon me. Is only a physical damage reduction, not necessarily magical. However, because his MR is so low anyways, which really only matters for like chapter 9 and a few niche levels here and there throughout the game, I would argue that, you know, you're not going to be seeing this so much, but understand that as long as he's above 50%, he's an extra bulky boy, and that is absolutely amazing as an Awakening 1. 20% damage reduction, that is fantastic. Awakening 2 is additional HP. That is always a fantastic stat for a tank, so no complaints here. During Annihilation mode, so that is his ultimate, the generation speed of Thermal Barrier is doubled. So Thermal Barrier was his talent, where it every 6 instances of damage taken, he gets a Thermal Barrier, increasing damage reduction by 30% for 5 seconds. So the generation speed of Thermal Barrier, instead of it being every 6 instances, I'm reading this as it's every 3 instances of damage. So not only is he regenerating HP because of his ultimate, but because of his passive and his passive refreshing, or his talent refreshing over and over again, he should be generating back a whole bunch of HP very quickly. Awakening 4, all damage reductions plus 5%. Very, very appealing. So right up here, it also doesn't say all damage reduction is increased by 20%, which is why I think that all damage reduction down here and this just saying 20% damage reduction makes me think that this is not MR, because they easily could have just added the word all in there. However, it could just be a translation issue or a lack of clarity. There's a few things in this game, not a few, there's plenty of things in this game where the champion descriptions could be clarified to make a player experience a lot better. Awakening 5. During Annihilation mode, attacks will inflict burning. Now, we've talked about burning a few times here on the channel, but what burning does is burning deals 20% magic damage per second. Burning effects from different sources can coexist. So if we have a Wrath and then like Titus is our tank, and then Wrath is, let's say, on the side, and they're both attacking the same target, they both can deal their own burning damage and melt away that boss. So if you needed a burn comp, or let's say that was your cup of tea and you like to light the world on fire, you could use things like Titus, Wrath, Azoth, all to deal burning effects to a target and just watching their health, Nasalt, watching their health just melt away with all these different burning effects. Now, burning effect does scale off of our damage stat. So unfortunately here, if we go the tank route, this Awakening 5 has the potential to be a lot weaker, which is why I'm trying to test out an attack percentage, defense percentage, and HP percentage build, is to see if we just kind of increase all of his stats across the board. Is there a time where he is an effective defender but still deals respectable damage? Because at the moment in this video, we're going to do a seesaw effect. We're going to do all defense and then all offense, and then it will be up to you, the player, to decide how much we like Titus and if you want to try to use him to his most effectiveness. So, where is Titus most effective? We have talked about this previously, and Titus is going to be this very oddball champion. I want to express this here and now. Anywhere you need a defender, he could be useful. However, his inability to be healed by others is going to make him a much more difficult and talented hand to use him effectively. He is definitely not the defender you just throw out no matter what. Oh, I gave him defensive gear and he's fine. So let's talk about places where I do think he could manage or could be his best. In Arena, anywhere where you need a tank, his high cost makes him near impossible to ever justify using him in the arena. However, if you were going for a gimmick strategy and you needed the extra tank and the extra damage, I could see him being okay there, especially if you waken him up to 5 with that burning effect. There's a chance that you could build him fully defensive, and that burning effect brings his damage into line where he would be both an effective tank and a good damage dealer. However, at the moment as it stands, I have somebody in my chat who's like, I don't have arenas last long enough for me to get up to 31 coins. And I also agree with that. I don't think it's going to be realistic to ever use him in the arena. In the campaign, as well as pretty much any of these raids that we're about to cover, one of my biggest arguments is going to be you most likely are going to need to play with Narvi or Dallin to play alongside of Titus to get him out in a reasonable amount of time. Yes, there's things like Guild Boss. Yes, there's things like Tide where you could argue, yeah, but you get to summon him out early. Or there are certain raids where you do start off with enough cost that you could summon him out early. Just because you can doesn't mean he's the best, right? He blocks off one lane. His single target damage, unless fully equipped for damage, is extremely low, even with his high damage stat. It's better than it's better than like Rex, right? Or some of your other epic defenders like Olag. Yes, he's dealing a lot more damage than Olag. I don't care though, right? It's a defender. We typically want them to block off the path and to stop anything from coming through. So right now we're having this really awkward moment that no one uses Titus. He's got a lot of defects to him, which I don't know if it's one of those, like, he's a hidden gem that people haven't cracked the code on what stats to give him. However, this video will show what he is capable of, and then you guys can decide from there if you want to mess with him and toy with him. Right now, though, I would absolutely argue, is he worth the dust and worth the awakening stones? Only if he's your absolute favorite and you plan to name your account, this is Titus, right? Other than that, I would typically encourage you go for your damage dealers first. Go even for like champions like Komodo, who I heavily encourage should not be a first champion to 6-star. Give your dust to, give your awakening stones to. Titus is pretty far down the list. That cost of 31 and the fact that there's no cost reduction for that. There is a gear set in the game where you can reduce it by 1, and I think there's an eventually gear set by 3. Let's see. So cost minus 1. All right, I don't remember where I got that cost minus 3 from, but yeah. So with that being said, trying to use him in a way where he can be his absolute best it is going to be difficult to find at the cost of 31. With that being said, where can we use him? Marksman, he has no place being in the marksman, right? The cost of 31, you could argue that he works well with marksman, since they typically have a low cost of like 10 to 12. Yes, you could argue that. I don't believe he hits flying units, even with eye laser. I don't know that for a fact. But the argument is still, by the time you could summon out Titus, you could summon out 3 marksmen. And for that reason, no, I would not summon him in any of the marksman content. For mages, there are times you could argue that the mage has that one or two anchor positions where there is a defender platform or like ground space, and that's it. You could put him there. Again, though, you're still talking about 31, and most of your mages are going to be killing things long before you need a defender. Now, if Titus is your only epic defender and you're in love with him, yes, by all means use him. It's going to be difficult. Insignia of Endurance. This is one where him not being able to be healed by others makes him a massive deficit, and this is where that rage regen is going to be very important. Admittedly, I haven't done the testing to know if the poison activates that thermal barrier where he starts regenerating health. However, the poison is max HP reduction, so I don't foresee Titus living through the poison, which is also a shame that he's a machine affected by poison. Melee attack. This is actually one of the few raids where I think you could use him and use him effectively. Him being a defender and then having that eye laser, there is merit where you could have him out as a defender to block things, and then having somebody like Ein behind him, or for those of you who watch the Komodo video, we could have the argument where we could summon him out in a position to block things that could attack from the side. So let's say we have him here. We're not really counting on his specific damage, although here you can see it is actually respectable damage for a defender. And you could do something like this, where we have him as a defender to block this lane and to bottleneck things here. However, I don't think that this would be the best use of him. You could put somebody behind him, like Ein, who can reach over top of him to attack. I would say that is probably most effectiveness for him. It is very difficult to say, but this is where eye laser can absolutely come into play. Eye laser will reach up to this point, so he could be hitting 2 to 3 enemies that he is blocking with eye laser, and therefore doing enough damage. Or you even could put him behind. I'm going to turn Volca the opposite way just for talking reasons. But if you had Titus facing the same way as Volca here, he could, with eye laser, be firing shots over her, and because she's an AoE attacker, as enemies would come up to her, she blocks 2 of them, but she's doing AoE damage up to 3 targets. That third unit would then get stuck on Titus if they're coming from right to left, would get stuck on Titus, so that would allow her to keep hitting the target and not let them pass by. It's one of the few times you want your fighter in front of your defender, not necessarily on their flank. But for most cases, I would argue just put them on your flank. So the next 2 contents we're going to talk about is contents where I kind of feel like a defender doesn't have its best place in the game, and that is our clan boss as well as Tide. Yes, you can bring defenders to both of these contents. On the former stream account, we just started a new one, by the way, but on a former stream account that we had, we did get Titus pretty early in the game. He was our second epic pull, and we were trying to use him to some effectiveness because he was an epic. There was times he was out surviving Dragon for a long time. He was able to heal himself back up quickly enough that he wasn't ever dying to Dragon. However, with that being said, he also wasn't putting out damage onto Dragon. So I definitely don't think Dragon would be a good home for him. You could argue that if you build him full damage, and we will talk about his damage and how respectable it is once we do the damage run of him, Understand, though, that as a defender, we definitely don't need one in Guild Boss. And when you get down to Tied, the argument is we want our BP as high as possible. Unfortunately, us having defenders, even if we have 4 defenders, all 6-starred, all fully geared out with HP defense gear, the truth of the matter is, yeah, they'll slow things down, but it's a BP check. We need as much BP as possible. So things like fighters and whatnot that can have really high BPs from giving them things like crit rate, crit damage, and attack percentage, unfortunately is going to make them more useful for a long period of time until you get above waves 100. Then I would argue, yes, you might need a defender there. I don't know how I feel like Titus will do in here, especially not being able to control his ultimate. Tied is auto content, right? We have no control of when the ultimates are used, and the AI does not use them based upon timing. It's just like, oh, I can use the ultimate, bam, I'm using it, whether or not it's effective or not. Resource raid. So we've talked about this with defenders before. We can use the defenders to plug the hole in resource raid and gold raid, since they're the exact same. Because Titus's cost is 31, I find this extremely hard to justify. These mobs are kind of just quick running mobs that we are meant to kill off quickly and efficiently, and I don't think Titus is going to be your best option for that. Even damage Titus, I don't think is the best option for these raids. Gear raids. Here is actually the one place I do think Titus, the more I think and struggle to be like, where is he going to be good at? This is one of the places I do think that Titus could flourish, right? Gear raid 1 is a very long, arduous gear raid. So the fact that he's a defender that you can gear up for with damage, and for him to put out respectable numbers, and again, we are getting close to the moment of showing off his tank ability and his defensive, defensive side, his damage ability and his defense ability. Gear raid 1 is one of the slower gear raids, where you could either put him behind the wall and then he can ult his eye laser from behind the wall, annihilating like 3 enemies at a time. I don't think it's the best. I'm saying it is a possibility that you could use. And then with his self-revive, he can be blocking things, and as he's healing himself, you know, the whole point of a defender is just to delay for as long as possible while your damage dealer are dealing all the damage. So if Titus is able to tank and sit up there in 6-star gear, I could see him being usable in gear raid 1 and 2. Now, the reason not 3 is all flyers, so we're just instantly going to eliminate that. When it comes to gear raid 2, the reason that I think that Titus could be an effective use of a tank is his self-revive mechanic. So ideally, you do need him to be able to survive the waves of the rollers as they're coming down. I don't know if they would actually do enough damage to Titus to activate his talent, Thermal Barrier, where he would start regenerating HP on his own. There also isn't gear in the game like this that says like gains an attack bonus equal to HP when deployed. There's no like static HP regen gear in the game. And I think one of the biggest reasons is for certain champions like Titus, or some champions that are like meant to get low on HP, that people wouldn't do the gimmicky thing of like, oh, well, I'll put him in this HP regen gear. And then like it's an invulnerable tank that doesn't need a healer. The game wants you to play with healers. They want you to play with a mixed party. Gear raid 2, his ability to survive through some of the ground pounds, and I guess you could even argue this for Dragon, that if you needed a gimmick way to survive through a Dragon Breath attack, you could summon out Titus, like you could unspawn your party, summon out Titus to tank the damage from Gear Raid 2 or from Dragon, and then he would persist through that breath attack because of that passive of him, that self-repair thing where he goes down for 5 seconds and comes back. While he is repairing, he does still maintain his block. So if he's blocking 3 units, he will continue to block the 3 units even in death until he fully repairs himself. That's when those 3 units can start attacking him again, and then they would have to kill him for good. Faction Trial. Faction Trial, I think, is the one place where he is going to be useful or like have his home. Now, we don't currently have the Infernals. That's not for another 2 days here. But in the Infernals, they have this very long passageway that's like a giant snake that things have to get through. And there's like only 2 points you can block on it. That is where Titus is going to be effective, is literally Faction Trials. Other than that, I'm finding it very hard to find a good place for him. Finally, if somebody's wondering why I skipped over Artifact Material Raid, this is where we're going to be showing Titus off to his greatest effectiveness. So right now, we have Titus geared up for tanking. So we're going to go to stage 13, and we're going to show off his ability to tank. And because we cannot heal him through other healers, this allows us to play with Mary. Mary is somebody we reviewed in one of the more recent episodes here. I'm going to have to relook at the numbers because I don't remember what point she's at. But here she's going to slow down the boss and put some debuffs on him. So this is one of those times where we can take Mary and use her to great effectiveness. If we had a tank that does not require healing, I would still argue, though, I guess I would rather have like my Comet, my main damage dealer, up on that wall rather than Mary specifically, but to each their own. So here we can summon out Titus. Now, I'm just going to let Titus tank for as long as he can. Here you can see that he's tanking a decent amount, and when he gets up to six attacks, he should be regenerating himself here. And unfortunately, he actually died again. I don't remember him dying there. That's a shame. That does not show him off well at all. But yeah, his thermal passive barrier did not seem to kick in fast enough. And then I did ult with him a little late. So we're going to drop down to 12. You know what? We're just going to drop down to 10 just so I can show off his ultimate properly and not waste your viewing time. But this is a perfect example of Titus can be a good champion, but his high cost makes some of this content just take a lot longer to take the most advantage of. So here, he's about at half health, and I'm just going to let him kind of get a little bit lower so that as we go into this ultimate, he is, in fact, just out-regenerating the damage that Salazar is using. Now, something in the tanking content that we just saw, something I want to stress is that some of his gear is yellow, so it's not as effective as it can be, and he's only 5-star and 5-star fully promoted, meaning that he could be up a bit higher. However, he is awakened. I did get an extra copy or two of him, so unfortunately, even with awakening, he is not tanking as much as I want him to, which is why I'm so hell-bent thinking. I genuinely think... I don't want to finish that one. It's one of the reasons I think that he is more supposed to be a damage-dealing tank rather than just a full-on tank. So here, we're going to go ahead and re-equip him real fast. As fast as I can manage it. And then we're going to show off his damage capabilities, because I think that is where most players are going to be impressed with him, or the potential to be impressed with him. So here I'm switching his gear back to Livian's gear, because my Livian was wearing some of this gear. Livian. Titus? I'm looking for Titus, not Livian. But yeah, as you can see with some of the gear that we're sorting through is some of the ability that Titus has. He's unfortunately just not tanking as much as we need him to. Now, as I get into red gear, his effectiveness obviously would go way up when it comes to tanking. And the gear we're about to put him in is not what I would recommend for the average player to do. We are going to be putting him in the best gear I have on this account, which is my Comet gear. So I'm going to let the mouse hover here for like 2 to 5 seconds on each piece of gear so that you, the players, understand what he is being equipped with, to be like, oh, okay, some of these stats are ridiculous. Of course he's going to do damage, right? What champion would not do a crap ton of damage in some of this combat gear? You are correct, right? You're 100% correct. The point of this is that if he is able to, at 5-star, fully promoted, to put out respectable numbers, it could actually mean that even though he's a defender, he's actually supposed to be a damage source, not a true defender, right? So he's like a very bulky fighter, not a true defender. And there's going to be people who love that aspect. There's going to be people who love the fact that he is this. Here's his total stats, by the way. There's going to be people who are going to say, I love robots, so this is super up my alley. And the fact that, yes, he takes more work to get out, but he does have an effectiveness in this game, is kind of crazy to consider that he can be used. So I'm going to bring him here into content 17. So we're going to be using Olag as a tank, and then the rest of my damage dealers are typically these nightmares. We're going to have Titus be one of the main damage dealers. Now, when I say to be one of the main damage dealers, I do need to get Wrath and Salazar out. So unfortunately, this specific level is going to feel a little bit longer. And okay, my mouse just decided that it did not want to drag. Oh my gosh, mouse. You and I have so many fights to have. Thank you for your patience. Let's try this again. Unfortunately, Titus's enormous cost. This is also going to be showing off the giant weakness of Titus. Even with high respectable damage numbers, it is still very difficult to justify Titus's obscene his obscene damage, because I need to be able to defend off these waves. And as you can see, so I summoned out, Wrath and Salazar, they are 34 cost. So I could have summoned Titus out pretty quickly here. However, I don't think Titus would be able to hold off these minions reliably and be doing enough damage, and then for me to depend on getting out my next unit. I guess with more practice, right, there's the potential for it. We are nearing his damage here. So now that we have him out, as we watch him slap, he is slapping for about 19,000 damage. Some of the other numbers, I know it's difficult to see because everybody's attacking at the same time here.
Let me handle it.
And again, I want to stress that Titus is in our damaging gear. Oh wow, we're going to kill him. This is a place where I do think Titus being able to self-heal, and there you can see he also didn't take a whole lot of damage from that. But his ultimate here can get up to like 40-some thousand damage. The problem is Wrath attacking at the same time. It is difficult to see exactly what Titus's numbers were. I'll do another run here real quick, and we'll just showcase off Titus's damage specifically. Yet this is one of those very weird instances where you could argue that this is where Titus's home in the game is that he can output very respectable numbers and live through Salazar ult. It is why I left the artifact material raid for last. I don't think that this is necessarily the best place for him. I want to say that it's a place for him. Is his ability to tank that damage and, kind of not care a whole lot. And there we can see that Vortex, even though we can't heal him, Vortex's Awaken passive can shield him up, which does make this kind of interesting. The other thing that I want to see is Volca gives the ability for other targets to heal themselves, and he's not supposed to be able to heal himself from other people's abilities. So I don't know if this is a glitch or an unintended feature, but if you use Volca in your party, you could use Volca and Titus. And I know that Volca is not necessarily easy for everybody to get. Just an interesting interaction. But here we go. 40,000 some damage, just constantly hitting. And for the record, I know for a fact it's not Volca. I can unsummon Volca, and there we can see that, you know, it is absolutely Titus. He is only 5-star. I want to stress that more than anything. Our 5-star champion hitting for $40,000 during his ultimate is equivalent to our Wrath, who is 6-star, hitting for the same comparable numbers. So I would say that anywhere in the game that Titus could be useful is a place where he has a chance to die, because if he has the chance to, like, if he has the ability to die and can just resurrect himself, and technically if he dies, he resurrects himself with more attack and more defense, I would say the Artifact Material Raid and then Faction Wars are his two best places. Faction Trials, it's kind of difficult to argue, like, oh, this is where he's best at, since you can only use some champions in that faction. And there's not, like, there's other tanks for me to use there as well. So yeah. Unfortunately, I think Titus is a really cool design champion, and I think his high attack leads him, from my perspective, to be a very interesting champion. I will let you know the results once I go. It's probably going to be a week or so before I upgrade his gear to see if he can take advantage of the attack, defense, and HP stats. I do think, though, I would need to take him up to 6-star to showcase him off properly, and how effective all those stats would be on him. Because unfortunately, at 5-star and with 1 awakening, you know, for a cost of 31, I will absolutely agree with everybody. I do think he is underperforming for his cost of 31 at current. However, he is not 6-star, so he's not taking full advantage of those stats. So I do think as a damage champion, I would say he's one of the few defenders in the game that could be built as a damage champion. And if you like the robot aspect of him, he is a decent tank when fully geared up for tanking. The content that we were putting him in, though, is above the 5-star level. Salazar just unfortunately does too much damage that you need a healer, and for him to not have a healer being able to heal him up, Salazar was just doing too much damage for him to activate his thermal barrier in time. And then when Salazar ultimates, which is part of the gimmick of that fight, is you being able to survive the Salazar ultimates, it's one of those things. There's too many, I don't want to say negatives, but there's too many hindrances to Titus to make him an all-star champion right off the bat. With that being said, do I think you would be making huge mistakes if you like him and you were to give him skill dust and to see how crazy you can get some of those attack stats or some of that damage? No. And a lot of the other champions we've reviewed on this account, we have had them with a bunch of their skills upped or even at max. So understand that he does technically have a very interesting, with a high potential to what he can do. I will agree with everybody, though, that enormous cost is just too much to justify the thermal barrier and some of the other things that he provides. I think that if instead of his ultimate being the eye laser, if his basic attack was always the eye laser, and if he just got like massive damage reduction or just repaired himself in his ultimate mode, I think it would make him a lot better and a lot more usable if his basic attack could hit up to 3 enemies or cause burning right away, not when you awaken 5 him. However, maybe that awakening 5 off of 4,000 attack is plenty. Maybe it does plenty of damage, and I'm just very underestimating how much burning damage truly does. But guys, that is the review. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, especially those of you who stuck around to this point, if you stuck around to this point, I guess you like cycloptic robots a whole lot with dual shields. I will say, though, in terms of design, this looks good, and I like how the chest cavity is kind of like bulbous to have all these gears spinning inside, which makes the arms and the legs make more sense, right? Like, even though this gear isn't touching the arm, it makes sense that these gears turning could move the arm, and then like some of these down by the legs are probably affecting the leg. This is a beautifully designed champion. I love the double shield aspect. I will say, though, I think it's hilarious that he even has arms, because like you could have just given him 2 giant shield plates instead of arms that, like, you know, he brings together or something. I don't know, but really cool champion, really cool concept. I'm really hoping that he is an undiscovered gem. If somebody here cracks the code on it, please put it down in the comments below, or send me a link and I'll just do a whole video reviewing your video. But I think he's a very fascinating champion. When I've asked players who they think the worst epic is in the game, he's always in the top 3 mentioned, and it's namely that cost. I think that cost is just too much for players. Same thing, block. If they increased his block to like being a base of like 5, I think that could justify the 31 cost to him. Unfortunately, though, he doesn't have that extra block. He does not have that block of 5. So until he gets that, I would err on the side of caution when using him. Thank you guys very much for watching, but of course, until that next time, ta-ta.